What's up, guys? Hope your day is going well so far. Let's cut straight to the chase. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is a strange show, but I love it a lot. I know that a lot of you guys do too, so I'm here to cover that today with a pretty unique, somewhat new take on an old idea, an old theory for this show, involving the TV series mostly, and how it ends. So that's today's video topic, but before we get into that, if you like the content and you like the channel, be sure to drop a like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot, and I would really appreciate it, so thank you. Alright, so first off, what all do we know about this very interesting television show? Well, actually, it started off first as a YouTube series. I think it's almost like 10 years old at this point, or more. It's pretty crazy how fast time flies. But most people who saw the YouTube series concluded that it was about the corruption of children's media and how corporations that control children's media can kind of restrict an artist from expressing things the way that they want to. But the TV series takes a bit of a different message. It uses the same kind of format of these three characters, redguy, yellowguy, and duck, being taught kind of dubious, twisted lessons in a very Sesame Street style manner. And it kind of uses that to tell a different story about grief and the right way to move on and some dangerous ways that people use to cope with grief and losing a loved one. And fittingly, that starts in episode 2 of the TV series, Death. So, this episode to me kind of comes across as the children's show episode in which they cover the topic of death, like Sesame Street talking about Big Bird's friend passing away, as a kind of a palatable way of showing children, you know, that important topic. But as always, it gets pretty twisted, because that's kind of the point of the show, right? So, the episode starts off pretty strong. Duck says he's dead. He reads in the paper that he died. And their floor of their house turns into a coffin, which behaves pretty strangely. And they hold a funeral for Duck, who is not actually dead, just to clarify. He's the same person, he's still there, but he's still talking, he's still kicking. But the coffin seems to kind of force his own expression of grief upon the trio, right? So, when yellowguy attempts to express his feelings at Duck's funeral by playing the trumpet, the coffin says, "No, I don't like that," and like plugs the trumpet up and tells him to stop. So that's kind of our first hints at this episode in this show, talking about grief and the various manners of coping with it and how people can use it kind of unhealthily, right? Through how this coffin kind of forces them into a box for how they respond at Duck's funeral. And then later on, after Duck gets buried, they go back home, and in their kitchen are a bunch of strangers who didn't even know Duck that are having another funeral for him. And they keep repeating things like, "Oh, you're so brave. Oh, we're so sorry for you. You're so strong," and this and that. These very superficial things that people tend to say at funerals to make people feel better about themselves and about losing a loved one, that don't always really mean anything in the first place. So that's another kind of take on how people respond to grief, right? But the most interesting part of this episode actually comes after all this, when this tissue box that has come alive at the funeral and is saying all these things to the remaining two, redguy and yellowguy, gives them a gift, a little goodie bag on the way out, featuring a kit to make a new friend. And redguy and yellowguy open it up and try to make a new friend from a selection of various characters from the kit, but yellowguy doesn't like any of the options. He wants Duck back. He doesn't want to replace Duck, or he also doesn't want to make new friends. He just wants original Duck back. He doesn't want to move on. But redguy ends up making this clone of Duck out of the kit, and he thinks that it's okay to replace Duck with the clone. So there's kind of this opposite ends of the spectrum where redguy wants to completely replace Duck with a clone of him. In a sense, he doesn't want to move on in that way. But yellowguy refuses to move on because he refuses to accept that Duck is dead. Like, he wants the original Duck back. And also, another very interesting kind of thing here is that the tombstone in which, on the grave in which Duck is buried, it says David. David is not his name. He mentioned that a few times. They also show some snippets of his life that he didn't actually do. So, like, he's like, I didn't do any of those things. And there's this mention of David a lot in this episode. So keep in mind this association with death and the name David because it's important here in a minute. But in the end, yellowguy digs Duck back up, and presumably the original Duck kills the clone of himself, though there is debate as to, who killed who there. Not too important for the episode, really, but the point is that there's this stark contrast between how the two characters respond to Duck's death. What's funny is that at one point they actually kind of agree, like, in this kind of strange denial phase, like right after it happens, like, oh yeah, we didn't like him anyway, it's fine that he's gone. But obviously that's not the case, because a bit after that, both of them try to cope with it in their own way. Like I said, both through trying to replace him with someone new, or with, just refusing to let him go, right? So that's episode 2, Death. The next episode that's important to this theory is episode 5, called Transport. So most of the episode here isn't that important, but let's put it this way. A strange train man comes and allows the main trio to leave the house for the first time just ever. So redguy is like, oh, I want to leave. It's so boring here. And his wish is granted, and they eventually end up driving far away from the house. Now, while they're driving, yellowguy sees a strange vision. And this vision shows a young boy who looks like him in this, it's very like old school style like film of like visuals. So it happens in the past, obviously. And this young boy that looks like him is new to a town, and he gets a gift of a bird. And the bird flies out into the road, and he chases after the bird, and a car hits him. Now, throughout all of this, there's a female voice narrating over it, and she reacts very strongly to this kid being hit by the car. Her voice acting here is actually very good. It's very scary, very real, and right as she screams out in horror, it cuts back to yellowguy in the car. There's a bird like splattered on the window. It's a pretty scary moment, one of the scariest moments in the show. So that happens here in this episode as well. But right after that, yellowguy comes back to his senses, and he's back in the car with the other two. And they keep driving, the car breaks down, they're out in the middle of nowhere, and eventually, after some time, watching the world like break around them because they're not supposed to leave, the same female voice from the narration says that the journey always ends up back at home. And we see her take the car and put it back in front of this model of the house that we see at the start of each episode, like in the opening. And we see her physically move the car. And so who is this woman? Why is she able to control their world? And what did yellowguy's vision mean? Like, what was it all about? These are all very good questions that are mostly answered in the next episode, episode 6, Electricity. So the episode opens a bit differently than the rest of them, because we see her hand, or the same hand at least as the previous episode's ending, cranking this like giant music box type thing to make the house spin around and play the opening theme. So she seems to be kind of this godlike being that's controlling their world. But yellowguy becomes smart. So he's not a super intelligent fellow, but he gains this kind of like intelligence, wisdom, and sentience after they swap out his batteries. So he has like a battery hole in his chest with a bunch of like old rotten batteries, and they swap them out with new ones. And he like has an awakening. And he realizes that there are stairs in the house. So he goes upstairs and encounters some new characters on a variety of floors. He encounters 2 different variations of redguy and Duck that are like pseudo-intellectual, like strange, kind of disturbing looking creatures that aren't too important for this theory. They certainly are important overall, but not for this idea. But at the very top, the very, very top, he finds the woman from the narration and the hands, and the one who's pulling the strings. And her name is Leslie. And here she is on the right in this picture. So Leslie talks to yellowguy, the new smart yellowguy, in this strange but like loathing, loving way at the same time. She clearly has mixed feelings about him. And she shows him the model of his world, of his house. And then gives him this book that supposedly contains answers to all of his questions. Then yellowguy is like, why can't I stay with you? And then at a pretty eerie moment, she kind of snaps, and she shouts at him, You aren't my real son. Which is a very strange moment, which is also a very integral part of this theory. So then Yellowguy goes back downstairs and has his batteries removed forcibly by Duck, and his book that Leslie gave him gets shredded. And that's basically where the show ends. They're back to normal. Everything goes back to the way it used to be. And Yellowguy never learns the truth about what his world really is. Now, my theory on the show is that it's about grieving. I already told you that. And that it explores some unhealthy coping mechanisms, like in death, like how they try to either replace the loved one with like a copy of them or someone like them, or just refusing to move on flat out. And I think that this idea that's set up in death can be extended to Leslie and Yellowguy. Well, mostly Leslie and how she responds, since she's kind of the one that's doing the actual acting here, whereas Yellowguy and his friends are kind of the victims of her unhealthy response. So there's this very popular idea that Leslie is the mother of a son who passed away in an accident like we see happen in episode 5. And that the son is named David. So we know that someone named David is dead from the tombstone and the people at the funeral and stuff. But it's not Duck because his name's not David, right? And we also know that Yellowguy's overalls have the letter D on them. And he also takes a more human form after he gets smart. So his hair, he has this kind of like less typical puppety, frizzy hair, and has like a more natural comb-over kind of style. And he gets like green color in his eyes, like he has irises now. So he looks more human. So the theory is that Yellowguy is a replacement of David by Leslie. So Leslie made this entire world, this entire system, as a method of coping with the loss of her son. And we know that she's not beyond doing this. She's not beyond resorting to this unhealthy means of coping, because we see her replace Duck. So at some point, we see that Leslie has the model of the house, and that things have gone kind of awry. It seems that while Yellowguy is gone, the downstairs has gone kaput. And Leslie's like, hey, want to help me out with fixing this? And so Yellowguy's like, sure, I'll help you fix it. But he knocks over this model of Duck. And he's like, oh no, I'm sorry, I broke Duck. And then Leslie's like, well, I have a whole drawer full of ducks. She says, I always keep backups. So she replaces the Duck model with another one. She seems to have plenty in stock, so she's not beyond replacing Duck the same way that Redguy attempts to with the Make a New Friend kit, like the clone of Duck. So the idea is that she did a similar thing with Yellowguy, that he's not her real son, but that he is a stand-in for her son in a very unhealthy way. And she's keeping Yellowguy trapped in a world of her making to prevent him from meeting the same fate to David. So if he stays trapped in the house and he can't leave, and that she can always control what's going on, then he won't ever get hurt the same way that David got hurt. And so finally, we know that Yellowguy has made the trip to Leslie's house, or the top floor of the house, before, but that it always gets sent back to normal again, because we see a number of things that kind of show this. For starters, so in transport, we see Yellowguy ramble about how he saw another him and this and that, so he's definitely been made smart before and gone on this trip before. We also see a picture on the wall of him going up the stairs as he goes up the stairs. That to me signifies that this is not the first time that he's made this journey before, that it's happened a number of times. So if Leslie keeps Yellowguy dumb and kind of like teases him with the truth but withholds it from him ultimately, it means that she'll be able to keep controlling him and keeping him safe, keeping him and his friends trapped here. But the ironic thing here is that while the three of them are trapped by Leslie's grief, my theory here, the extension of this theory, is that Leslie is equally as trapped. Now, people have been asking for a while, been wondering what is above Leslie, because one of the last shots of the show shows that there are more stairs that go up from Leslie's room, from her top floor. So we know that this show is canceled, or isn't going to come back. So we might not ever get an actual answer to this question. But I do have an idea. which is that there's nothing actually up there. So the house, as we see in the picture here, this is the top floor. There is nothing above this in the house. So those stairs don't represent a literal floor above her where like a different character resides that's pulling her strings. It represents more of a concept of her unhealthy coping and her refusal to move on from her son's loss that is controlling her. So there is no physical top floor. There's only the concept, the representation of how she is also trapped in her own guilt, perhaps, but especially in her own grief and her own refusal to move on from the loss of her son. With that in mind, thanks for watching the video. If you made it this far in the video, you must like the video, so why not like the video? Also, shout out to Rosie Pixels and Frisky for donating on Ko-Fi, Apple Juice team members A Herman24 and Blake the Snake, Orange Juice team member Glee, Fruit Salad team member Kamaluk, and the absolute greatest, the Crazy Juice tier member Tybee. Love you guys. Be safe, be smart, don't be stupid, and have a great rest of your day.